All right, so good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those of you who are new to this, and I know we do have some new classrooms and new teachers today, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. You can check out our full line of events on exploringbytheseat.com, and we hope that you'll continue to join us as we highlight amazing scientists, educators, and explorers from around the globe. So today is really special. Today is part of our most exciting week to me in the entire school year, and that is Secret Path Week. So today I want to take the chance to acknowledge the fact that we are on land in Canada that has been steeped in thousands of years of traditional Indigenous history, tradition, and more, if equally, or if not more importantly, it's still the home to over 1.6 million First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. So Secret Path Week is our partnership with the Gord Downie Cheney Wenjack Fund. It's something that we did last year, a great fanfare. A lot of our teachers today have been involved in some of the programs throughout the week. And in it, we help to celebrate amazing activists, educators, explorers, scientists, and more from Indigenous communities across Canada. So we really, really appreciate you taking the time with your class to learn with us today, to keep the learning going with some of the resources we'll share after the fact, and to just take part in helping find meaningful ways to work towards reconciliation with Indigenous communities across Canada, something that the Gord Downie Cheney Wenjack Fund is all about. Today, I'm particularly excited to welcome in a friend of mine. I didn't expect to be hosting this session today, and I'm really excited to get to be involved in sharing her stories with you today. So we are joined by newly minted Dr. Andrea Reid. She is a member of the Nisga'a Nation. She is an assistant professor at the University of British Columbia I want to get all this right, the Institute for Oceans and Fisheries, where she's going to lead the Indigenous Fisheries Research Unit. So her work over the last 5-10 plus years has been all tied up with fisheries, with coasts, with Indigenous communities across Canada and around the world. She's done incredible work with National Geographic, the Explorers Club, and more. And I'm really honored and privileged to welcome her in today. So Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. And come on in and take us away.
Thank you so much, Jesse, for the super warm welcome. It is my absolute pleasure to be here with all of you, coast to coast to coast. I really appreciate having teachers and students excited about this work and these subjects, and I'm just so glad to be a part of Secret Path Week, this national movement to build understanding and relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in the land that we now call Canada. So I'm going to start today by saying Neat, am Willa Willina. That's Nisga'a for hello, how are you? But I only know little bits and pieces of the Nisga'a language. I'm very far from fluent because I didn't grow up with this part of my culture or my language, but I'm working hard now to learn what I can. So I'm going to share with you some key Nisga'a words with all of you today as I tell you just a little bit about myself and my journey. And then after that, I'll be more than happy to take your questions and hear your stories. So starting with a little about me. So the first thing that I want to share is that I come from two different places. So on my dad's side, we're from northern British Columbia, northern BC. And on my mom's side, we're from Prince Edward Island, all the way on the East Coast, PEI. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about BC first. So this is my grandmother's village, Gingol, way up where BC meets the Alaska Panhandle. So just at the bottom of Alaska, and those mountains that you can see in the background, that's actually the base of Alaska right there. So this is a beautiful, small Nisga'a village where my Gigi, Nisga'a for grandmother, this is where she was born. My Gigi belonged to the killer whale Gisgas clan, and she belonged to a really big family, so I still have lots of aunties and cousins who call Gingol and the Nisga'a Nation home. But my Gigi, she didn't get to stay in the community and in the culture for long. She was taken from the community at a very young age from northern BC all the way to the south, just outside of Vancouver, where she attended residential school, the Kokalitsa residential school, like so many other kids at that time in this area. So my dad was actually born in southern BC, not in the Nisga'a Nation. And he was part of something called the 1960s Scoop, where Indigenous kids were being adopted by non-Indigenous families. So he grew up without knowing much about who he really is or where he comes from. And that's part of the reason that I grew up way over here on PEI, where my mom is from. And I grew up right on the ocean. So this is Abagwit, which is the Mi'kmaq word for Prince Edward Island. This is a Mi'kmaq word that means cradled on the waves. And that's exactly how I grew up. I loved swimming. I loved chasing fish, collecting rocks and shells. My house right now is filled with little jars of rocks and shells from the beach. And this is me in front of my very favorite lighthouse growing up. This was just down the road from the house that I grew up in. And I loved water from the very, very start. The second thing that I want to share with you today is that I see the world in two different ways. So after I grew up on PEI, I went off to university like many people do, and I wanted to learn everything that I could about water and fish. I wanted to become a scientist and to help protect our oceans, our rivers, our lakes, our streams, and everything that lives inside them, like these little guys. I wanted to do scientific research, so I learned how to scuba dive. And this is me scuba diving in Hawaii. This is me in the Solomon Islands taking pictures underwater on coral reefs where I was counting fish, identifying different species of fish, finding out where they live, how healthy they are. And so I got to work in these really beautiful spaces. And I also got to work in really incredible freshwater systems, lakes and wetlands in different parts of the world. This is me in this beautiful wetland in Uganda in East Africa, where I was searching for really, really, really big fish. This is a monster fish called the Nile perch. But I was also looking for fish that were pretty small, like this guy. This is a haplochromine cichlid, and the Nile perch love to eat these fish. And I was working with fishers from around the world, learning directly from people who know the fish best. I was learning to be a trained scientist and explorer, and I started working with the National Geographic Society, like Jesse said. But at the same time, I was starting to realize that there are people who understand and who know the fish in a whole different way than traditional science, and there's so much that we can learn from them. I was working with fishers who could tell me when and where we could find certain kinds of fish, when it was next going to rain. They could read the world like a book. Can you imagine being able to do that? So this caused a huge shift in my thinking about the world around us. Being a scientist didn't necessarily need to mean wearing a lab coat or having to dissect the world around us in order to understand it. There are other ways that scientists can look, that people can become experts simply by how they live and move through the world. They can carry knowledge passed down across generations that pertains to the fish, the health of our environment, some really important questions that we're trying to tackle in science. And these are people that often live in relationship with the fish and with the environment, so know it so deeply, like Jesse said at the beginning. So these people can be veritable, they can be real fish scientists without having to go to university and take the approach that I and many other scientists have done. But it also doesn't need to be either or. Maybe we can use the knowledges and the tools from both ways of coming to learn about the world around us in order to help us understand and protect our lands and waters to the best of all of our abilities. And this is an idea that many Indigenous peoples around the world already have and practice. In the Mi'kmaq tradition, this is a concept called Etoweptimuk, or two-eyed seeing, which means learning to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous knowledges and ways of knowing, and learning to see from the other eye with the strengths of mainstream or Western knowledges and ways of knowing, and learning to use both these eyes together for the benefit of all. And this is a teaching that is carried by Mi'kmaq elder Dr. Albert Marshall, who I have been really privileged to learn about the tradition directly from. And it turns out that many Indigenous nations, from from within Canada to across the United States to Australia to New Zealand, they have similar kinds of understandings for bringing together distinct ways of knowing. So they all practice two-eyed seeing. They just might call it something different. So what does this actually look like in practice? I'm going to tell you about some of my work to give you a better idea. So I hope some of you can recognize what kind of fish this is. This is Pacific salmon, specifically it's sockeye salmon, and salmon are known as han in the Nisga'a language. And salmon move between lakes and rivers and the ocean across their life cycle. So they start out in fresh waters as these tiny little eggs and then smolts, and they work their way down to the ocean where they feed as much as they can, get as big as they possibly can before they return home to where they were born, and then they give rise to that next generation. And so for me as a fish scientist, I'm just really curious to track their migrations, to find out where they go and how they get there. And so I use this really cool scientific technology called radio telemetry, where I take radio tags that look like this, so you can see the size of them, and they have this little microchip on the inside of the tag. And I put this inside the bellies of fish as I catch and release them. So as one example, I have this little sockeye salmon here. We would put it down the fish's throat into their bellies, and we keep the fish submerged underwater the whole time so we're not hurting the fish. And then this tag just hangs out in their bellies with the little antenna hanging outside the fish. And these fish, because I'm tagging them when they completely stop feeding, when they get back to their rivers to go home to spawning grounds, they completely stop feeding. So this is a really cool way that we can tag the fish to find out where they're about to go. And we use these things, these radio antennas, just like your parents might have on the car, in order to listen to the radio. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm listening to fish radio to find out where these fish have gone. But this really only tells me where the fish go. It doesn't allow me to recapture the fish and see how they're actually doing. So you know how you might go to the doctor every year, probably to go in and get a checkup? You might do that once each year, and this is kind of the same thing, except it's me that's the doctor and it's the fish who are the patients. And so to recapture the fish, I use this ancient technology that you see here. This is a fish wheel. This is a Nisga'a fish wheel. And my nation uses these platforms to monitor the fish. So they put these fish wheels in clever places in the river that they already know that the fish are going to go there because they've been monitoring them for generations. And so using this traditional tool in the traditional way, we can easily recapture the fish as they're moving through the environment. So these fish wheels, they're kind of like a Ferris wheel for fish. They're powered by the river current. So as the river moves, these baskets go up and down in the water, and they collect fish and water together. And then they dump the fish into these little baskets where you can see there's a technician who's scooping out a fish. And then they can measure the fish, they can see how it's doing, look at its gills to see if they're healthy before they release the fish back to the water, and it continues along its migration. So this way, this allows me to do that health check on each of the fish that I'm tagging and studying. So it's really through bringing together both of these ways of monitoring the fish together that I can get a full picture of both how they're doing and where they're going. It's kind of like looking through glasses or binoculars, right? If you're only looking through one lens, the image looks really different than when you're fully looking through both. So this is something that I do now in all of my work. I learn from both my professors and my elders in tandem. And I teach through both lenses. When I work with youth in my nation and non-Indigenous youth as well, I lead land-based learning camps is one example. And I'm going to show you what this looks like to learn from multiple ways of knowing. So I'm going to shift into a short video. It's a few minutes to give you a sense of what this looks like from the perspective of youth in my nation.
So it's important for each one of you to know who you are, the family you belong to, the crest you belong to.
So with that, I hope that you found that exciting. I love seeing just all these kids engaging with the work that we do in the nation, where they learn to practice tagging fish and seeing how we monitor them and all that kind of thing, how we monitor water health, environmental health. And so I just wanted to wrap up my portion before we shift into Q&A, because I really want to have space here to hear from all of you. I just want to wrap up by saying that by sharing Gord Downey's call to action, which is to do something. We can all be water, fish, and land protectors, and it's really never too early to start. This is Autumn Peltier, who is an Anishinaabe water protector, and she's a teenager now, but she started being a water protector for her nation at the age of 8. She's now spoken to the Prime Minister, the United Nations. She's written to the Queen about our need to protect our waters and to work together to the best of our collective ability to do something now. And we're really just at this point, we're at a point in our environment where we need all the best tools at our disposal, and TwoEyed Seeing is a really clever way to get us there, so we can use all of the best information, the best tools, the best technologies to come together for collective solutions that help fish, people, and place. So with that, I'm going to close with 2 Nisga'a words, Toyuk. Thank you all, and I'm super excited to hear what you all have to say and to hear your questions.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Andrea. If you want to end your screen share and have a bit of a conversation where you can see us a little better, go for it. And I just want to say thank you for such a beautiful presentation, cool video, and more. I don't know if that video exists in a place where we can share it with classrooms if anyone wants to watch it again, but please do send it to me and I'll make sure everyone gets it. So we're going to dive in with questions. We've got 11 at least live classrooms from across Ontario, Alberta, British Columbia, live on YouTube and beyond. So thank you so much to all of you for tuning in. For our live classes, get your questions ready while you're getting your first one from your kids. I'm going to take one on YouTube from Miss McLaughlin's class, and they're joining us in the Niagara region, one of the best places in Canada. Easy one for you. What is your favorite kind of fish and why? From Nick.
That is an easy one, but I always love getting that kind of question because, as you can tell, I never tire from talking about fish. So my favorite one is the sockeye salmon. I just think that they're so cool. They're amazing fish that sometimes when they get to spawning grounds, you'll see them and they can be missing an eye, or sometimes you can see part of their brain. Like sometimes they are in such rough shape, but they still work so hard to make it home. They're a really impressive animal.
Yeah. Fantastic. All right, we're going to go to Toronto now for Mr. Bodor's class, grade 9. So I'm going to bring him into the broadcast. And if you have a question for us, just demute your mic and you're good to go. In fact, all our teachers that are live can demute your microphones. You're not in the broadcast right now, so we'll make it easier when we go to Q&A. So Mr. Bodor, take us away.
All right, so it's just me. My class is still watching virtually though. So I'd like to know from your research, what are some of the most pressing issues in Canada's fisheries right now?
That is a wonderful question. Thank you very much for asking. So there are some very big issues facing our fish and our fisheries in Canada. A major one that's a really big challenge and really hard to find clear and easy solutions is climate change, especially when we're talking about fish like salmon, who are cold water fish. The warming of our rivers and our oceans is having really negative impacts on the fish. And so that's a really, really big challenge. But our fish and our fisheries are facing all kinds of problems, which is why we need so many land and water protectors moving forward. Right now, we are facing a lot of difficulties politically, ecologically, you name it, and it's a problem for our fish and fisheries. So a really big issue is that none of these things act in isolation from one another. And so part of my research centers on how interacting threats affect the fish. So if there's overfishing in tandem with climate change, in tandem with the presence of a major dam on their waterway, how does that come together to affect the ability of fish to reach their spawning grounds? So really thinking in that more holistic way, because in reality, it's not a lab experiment. It's not a controlled environment where you can isolate one variable.
I love that we started with such a hardcore question to begin. That was a very thoughtful answer. Thanks, Andrea. Let's go to Miss Russell's class. They're joining us in Brampton. Miss Russell, come on in and go for it.
Okay, I have Armand here. Go ahead, Armand.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can, yeah.
So I was wondering what your perspective on the Mi'kmaq fishery crisis in Nova Scotia was.
Second hardcore question. I love it.
Absolutely. I wasn't sure what age groups were going to be tuning in, so I wasn't sure how hardcore to make it. But I am happy to speak to what's happening in Nova Scotia. We really need to stand up for Indigenous rights, for Mi'kmaq rights in this country. We have a lot of policies in place in this country that are the result of really important Supreme Court of Canada decisions that protect Indigenous rights and our rights to access fish for food, social, and ceremonial purposes, but also to earn a livelihood. And so this is a really controversial moment in our history. It's been something that's been a problem in our past as well, and it's surely to be a problem in our future. But we really need to give a lot of attention to what's happening. And I don't think that there's any context in which the violence that we're seeing on the East Coast is warranted. And this is a tough conversation to have, and it's a big conversation to have. So I definitely welcome more questions in this space.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for the question to Ms. Russell, student. That was, again, we're on a roll here, Andrea. I want to head to Newmarket now. Ms. Glanfield's class has been asking a great question in the chat bar, but I'd love if you'd come in person and share it. So Ms. Glanfield's class, if you want to demute your microphone, you're good to go and can share it with us. Hopefully.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we're good.
We're wondering if your traditional knowledge is always honored in academic spaces and how you go about promoting two-eyed seeing among your peers.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's increasingly there is interest in this, and the more that I speak about it and bring it to the fore, the more that I feel that people are creating space for it and recognizing the validity of Indigenous knowledge systems. I think for a long time we were dealing with situations, and I mean, it's still a problem to this day where it's not in the educational system, and so many people grow up without learning about Indigenous people's histories and knowledges in this country. And so hopefully through initiatives like this, but also hopefully changes to curriculum in the right direction, means that those values and that awareness can be built into how people are learning. But it is really a challenge, and a major challenge is that a lot of my work is trying to embrace a more holistic understanding of our fish and our fisheries. But many of the funding bodies in this country are very siloed. And so it's very difficult to pitch a project to them that brings together all of these different facets when they're asking for just one specific focus. So I think we still have some catching up to do in our educational systems, in our funding bodies, and in many spaces. Thankfully, I feel like I have a lot of people who are standing up for me, who are encouraging me, and I have made really strong allegiances with other Indigenous scholars who are creating the same space for those kind of coming down the pipeline behind us. And I've had the benefit of having some really strong academic mentors, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and some elders to guide me on this path.
UBC is lucky to have you, Andrea. I'm so excited for you to join there in January, and we're excited both as classrooms and as Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants to follow your career. It's fantastic stuff. These are some great answers. All right, we're going to keep it going. I'm going to go to a YouTube class for a second, and Miss Hewitt, I'm coming to you guys next live. So this is another question from Newmarket. You mentioned your family's past experience with residential schools, the 60s Scoop. Has there an ongoing impact in your family that you can chart either with you personally or other family members because of that experience?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important and, again, big question, but I think that's really the space of Indigenous fisheries, to be sure. It took me a long time to recognize what the impact was growing up on Prince Edward Island and away from that culture. I knew about it. My parents tried to keep it alive, and we were connected to the Mi'kmaq community. We would go to powwows. I worked each summer at the nearby reserve, but it didn't really, I didn't really come to fully understand it until I was an adult and could see the ripple effects of how it affected the makeup of my family, that my parents did not stay together, that had consequences for where I grew up and how I grew up. And yeah, it has impacts to this day. My grandmother, my father has his PhD as well, and in his PhD thesis, he quotes my Gigi as saying that she was kicked out of residential school once she could read, write her name, and do basic arithmetic. And my father and I have both flourished in the academic system, and I have received tremendous support from the Nisga'a Nation. They have supported me through my bachelor's, through my master's, and throughout my PhD. And so I've had this completely opposite experience in education, thanks to the Nisga'a Nation, thanks to an Indigenous government, while it very much was a Canadian government policy that took that opportunity away from my grandmother.
Yep. For some of the students that might not know about the residential school history of Canada, or some of the major issues that have been happening for hundreds and even in the last decades, in the last 2 years, two of the things that we want to share are Downey Wenjack site, so downeywenjack.ca. Again, very committed to reconciliation and education, so you can check out some of the resources on that page. And one of the others, one of our big partners, is the Royal Canadian Geographic Society, who has the Indigenous Peoples Atlas of Canada, which is a beautiful, really incredible, and as comprehensive as can be, a story of the history and stories of Indigenous peoples in the country. So I encourage classrooms to check that out as well, just to learn more about this. If you don't understand some of the context, those are some resources that will help. With that, I want to go to Miss Hewitt's class, joining us in Burlington. If you guys have a question for us, come on in.
Hi, okay, Athena's got a question for us right here in the front. Go ahead, Athena.
Do you help
Louder.
fish other than tagging? Like, do you help endangered species not become extinct or something like that?
Yeah.
That's also a really good question. You guys are ready with great questions. Yeah, well, so now, I mean, I work on lots of species that are of conservation concern. Throughout my research, a lot of this work has been on species that are at risk of extinction. Currently, my current work on salmon, sockeye are actually in the Fraser River in British Columbia's historically its biggest salmon producers. They're now considered to be on the brink of extinction. They've been declared to be a collapsing stock. And so hopefully this work helps to inform the policies that are used to manage the fish. And so in my nation, the research that I've done, it goes right into the decisions that are made on how we fish and when we fish and that kind of thing, so that we can do things better in the future. So it's a real benefit of working with a sovereign nation. The Nisga'a Nation is a self-governed nation, and so it's easier to have that partnership in place and to have that impact on the policies that are influencing the fish themselves.
Fantastic. Thanks, Andrea. All right, we're going to go to Miss Hall's class, then I'll take a couple from YouTube before we wrap up with our other 2 live classes. So Miss Hall's group joining us in Toronto. If you guys want to come in, go for it.
Hi, just my student Juaria wanted to know, do the trackers that the salmon have, do they impact other species if they're eaten?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So some tags that you use, they can have that kind of information kind of embedded into them, that if they get eaten by something else, that the tag will send a signal, so we'll know what happened to that fish. The tags I use, they don't have that ability, so it's hard for me to know. In terms of the impact on the fish themselves, it's really minimal. This is a really good way to use the biology of the fish to do this, because they're no longer feeding. They're not using their stomachs anymore. And so when we put the tag inside the fish, their stomach actually atrophies around the tag and holds it in place. But it helps us, it allows us to not have to do a surgery to the fish, which is often how fish are tagged, or simply just sticking it on the outside of the fish, which is another way that fish can be tagged, but that creates a lot of drag and problems for the fish swimming. So this is kind of a clever workaround for that. In terms of impact to things that are eating it, that really depends on who's doing the eating. So for bears, I have some examples, but not handy. But if anyone wants to send me an email, I can put my email address in the chat and I can share the photo that I'm thinking of. But there are bears that when they open up the fish, they'll just take it apart. And so we've found scattered remains of the fish with the tag just kind of like strewn out. They will just selectively not eat it. But it could have impacts for other animals, and that's something that that researchers are increasingly trying to look into. But where we tag the fish, they're just about to go into the river system. So it's really unlikely that they're about to be eaten by, say, a whale or something like that.
Fantastic. And we'll share that email with the classes that registered for this program too. So Andrea, prepare to be inundated with emails. I'm sorry in advance, but it's a good thing. I know you're keen to have those sort of questions. We'll take a few from YouTube and then we'll wrap up with Miss Hills and our Pineview class live. So there's a few great questions on YouTube. Thank you so much to all our classrooms. There are at least 7 full classrooms now. So we're at like 300 plus kids. It's a crazy session. So I love this one from, again, Pineview Public School in Petawawa. Why did you choose to follow this path in studying fish? And how did you know that this was the path for you?
Yeah, so I think part of that is that I think it really chose me. Like, I've been passionate about this for a very, very long time. I think that there's truth in blood memory, right? Like, I didn't grow up surrounded by salmon or knowing that aspect of Nisga'a culture, but it's been like this magnetic draw for me to be in that space. But it was really exciting for me. I mean, I always loved science. I knew that in school, I just really loved numbers. I actually thought for a little bit that I might go into mathematics, but then I went to university and decided that wasn't for me. But at university, I got to take field ecology courses. And that was just, that was land-based learning for university students. And I fell in love with that. And then the moment that I realized that being an aquatic ecologist, a fish scientist, that was a real job, there was no turning back.
Awesome. All right, we'll throw another toughie your way and then a simple one, and we'll dive back in with our live classes. So this is Carter. What are the challenges of being a conservation scientist, and do you have any thoughts on the new plastic ban starting in 2021?
Also great questions. Jesse, is there any way to bring it up again, just because they're two elements unrelated? Thank you. So the challenges of being a conservation scientist. Well, I mean, there are many. I think that we are at no shortage of problems to be working on. And so I think that there's more work than there are conservation scientists. So we need more kind of allies in this work to get the job done. There are political challenges currently in the way that certain governments are swaying. It can be increasingly challenging or easier at different times. So that's certainly a consideration. In terms of the plastic ban, I'm not a microplastic person or focus on that, but I've seen adverse impacts in certain fish populations, and it's known that, you know, fish will consume plastics. And so I think anything that we can do to reduce risks to our waterways is important for fish, it's important for people, it's important for everything that relies on water, which is most everything that lives on this planet.
Outstanding. And for classes that are interested in learning more about microplastics and the impacts of plastic bans, all September long, our theme was ocean plastics. So we did at least 25 broadcasts on that topic. Chelsea Rockman is a researcher out of the University of Toronto. She's an amazing advocate for this. Jennifer Provencher, some of our top people over the last few years we've had talk about these issues. So if you're keen to learn more, check out our YouTube page at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. All right, a really simple one, but I think a really, really important one when we get a lot with fishery scientists. Do you eat fish?
Also a great question. I feel like I'm just repeating myself every single one. But I actually don't. When I was about 12 years old, we were having a big family meal, East Coast, so there were lobster all over the table. And I was looking at these lobsters and I was thinking about how they're no different from my cat or from me. And I decided then that I was done eating animals. And so I've been vegetarian ever since. I have thought for a long time that in certain contexts at Nisga'a feasts or when I've been traveling abroad, that I would be open to eating fish from that place that were, you know, harvested sustainably and by the people that I'm with in that space. But I to date haven't, and I think that that's just, I have the privilege to let those lives continue to live. But I think that in many cases it's a critical source of protein, of connection to the culture. I think it is beautiful and wonderful, but it's not necessarily for me.
You are the first person ever to have that answer. Almost everyone we've ever had on says yes, that they do, and highlight some things. So I really appreciate that, and thank you for the different perspective. I will note for a student that is interested in fisheries science and wants to choose sustainable seafood, a program that we highlight a lot in this broadcast is the Ocean-wise Sustainable Seafood Program. So you can look for the little Ocean-wise symbol. It looks like a little fish in a white circle on restaurant products, in grocery stores, and that means that the fish was harvested in a sustainable way. It's a really fantastic program, so I encourage you guys to check that out at Ocean-wise if you're so inclined. All right, let's go to Miss Hill's grade 8 class. If you guys have a question for us, come on in, just mute your mic and you're good to go. I'll mute my phone from ringing.
Hi there, Andrea. We just had a question about what challenges you face as a scientist while you're working with other scientists who don't have that two-eyed perspective. What challenges you face working with colleagues and how you overcome those.
I think a major challenge is that people are inclined to treat Indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge as data, that they want to just build it into a model, a Western scientific model that they've already built, and for things to just work in that mechanistic way that we're used to in the sciences. And so that can be a real challenge, is just getting people to shift their frame of mind and how we think of these things. And that's really the beauty of Two-Eyed Seeing, is that it's not trying to incorporate or integrate Indigenous knowledge into science so it can be made valid. It's really about having two separate parallel approaches that we can draw from in tandem, but they're coming together. It doesn't disrupt the strength or the integrity of the other. In so many cases, Indigenous knowledge has to be shrunk or transformed so that it can fit within a Western science framework. And that's something that we really need to move away from. And it's something that definitely rears its head in a lot of my collaborations, and it requires a lot of just educating and knowledge translation on my part to always have to make that case and to always have to stand up for those values and be that person. So I really treasure those collaborations where that's already a mutual understanding, and that's kind of the foundation that we're working from.
Yeah. Andrea, this is an amazing presentation. For all the classes that are here, you guys have had such a treat today. This has been an incredible conversation with some amazing questions. So thank you to the classes, and thank you to Andrea for your really thoughtful answers. We're going to wrap up with one last question. That 45 minutes just flies by. So we're going to go to Pineview School in Pembroke, Ontario. Hi, guys. Do you have a question for us? Go for it.
Yes, it's my student Elizabeth.
Thank you.
I'm wondering what inspired you to become a biologist?
Ooh.
That's a good question. I mean, I am so curious about things. Like when I see something new, say I was walking down the beach and I find a little creature on the ground, I'm so curious to know more about it. So for me, ecology and biology is just getting to explore those curiosities, to just try to find out more about what's in the world around me. It's just been really exciting, but I also love my job, because then part of my job means being on boats, being underwater, catching fish, and getting to spend time with fishers and people who I adore learning from. So it really is the combination of all of these things, and there are challenges that come with that too. I have to spend a lot of time on my computer. I have to do presentations like these while I enjoy this, but I have to crunch data and do that kind of thing on my computer. And so it's a balance of both, but this has just been a dream job for me. So I'm super excited to be moving to Vancouver at the end of next month. And I'm about to begin, as Jesse said, at the University of British Columbia, leading a group that focuses on Indigenous fisheries. So super excited about next steps.
Outstanding. Well, I think we could probably talk all day, and all our classes have many more questions typing in the chat bar, typing on YouTube. We will pass along your email like you shared with the registered classes, so classes will have a chance to share more questions with you over the coming days and weeks. So please do, guys. And I'd encourage all of you to check out Andrea's website. You can learn more about the amazing stuff she did. She didn't touch upon a quarter of it today in her presentation. We simply didn't have time. So I encourage you to check that out, because there's some really amazing projects that she's been a part of, spearheaded and beyond. So I hope you get a chance to do that. And Andrea, do you have a last message for us before we wrap up? One last thing you want to leave kids thinking about before they leave today?
I'm going to echo myself and just say, do something. It's so easy to count yourself out or to think that you can't have an impact or achieve something in this world. And by thinking that, then you're surely not going to have an impact. So get out there and help clean up waterways or help reduce the impact that us humans are having on this environment that fish rely on, that we rely on, and to keep this world beautiful. But thank you all for your attention. It's been great, and your questions are truly amazing. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So what we're going to do at the end of every broadcast is, you know, Andrea, some of our teachers might be new to this. I'm going to demute and bring in all our teachers today, all 7 classrooms into the broadcast, to say a big thank you and goodbye for all your efforts today. So all our teachers are in. You guys so much for joining us, and say a big thanks and goodbye to Andrea, everyone. Have a